السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. مساكم الله بالخير. شكرا لحضوركم هذه المحاضرة التي بعنوان Let's Talk OKR اللي تقدمها المستشارة ألينا مورتويو. Is that right? Mortoyo.
The first time
was better, okay? Okay. All right. Alina will be with us tonight delivering this webinar. Alina is working as a consultant with the KPI Institute. She is also the developer of the OKR certified OKR professional training course materials, and she's still working on that and continuing to update the materials. Alina is as I said, a senior consultant with the KPI Institute. She is also certified KPI professional and certified OKR professional, and had delivered over 1,000 training and consulting hours last year. Alina also is frequently writing research-based articles for Performance Magazine, the OKR Institute online magazine dedicated to strategy and performance. As an educator, Alina delivered the certified KPI professional and practitioner, certified benchmarking professional, certified performance management professional, and certified OKR professional. As a consultant, one of Alina's significant projects focused on implementation of the OKR system in governmental entity from Middle East and other countries.
I'm not sure if this problem is only with me, but you're
PhD candidate. Okay, let me just let me find him.
Yeah, it's better now. I can hear you.
Okay. Alina delivered consulting services and training services to Saudi Aramco, Qatar Fund for Development, many more companies. So I let the floor for start the webinar. And can you hear me?
I can hear you now, but you were still breaking a moment earlier.
Okay, you can start, please, and let me give you the. I'll make you a host.
But I think it works just fine. Don't.
Okay, all right.
If you can all see my screen, then that should be fine.
I can see your screen. It's on the. It's very clear. Yes. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much for your introduction, and of course for having me deliver this webinar. Thank you to all our participants for taking from their time and joining us. I do hope we're going to make this session quite interactive and pleasant for you, so you feel like you've learned something about OKRs today. I'm just going to quickly introduce the agenda and what we've prepared for today. I will do my best to keep it in under 45 minutes or under 40 minutes, so we also have time for questions and answers, and we can debate on every topic. And I've structured the agenda in 3 main topics. The first one, of course, it's the introduction to OKRs. And then we're going to tackle a little bit the OKRs compared to more traditional performance management systems. And here I know that everyone is wondering what is the difference between OKRs and KPIs, or OKRs and balanced scorecards. So this is mostly what we're going to focus on. And then in our third session, or third mini session, we're going to discuss some tips and tricks for implementing OKRs. And of course, aligning OKRs as well. So as the session objectives, or the key learning points for today, we are going to try to understand what are OKRs. Of course, this is quite a complex topic. So we're probably just going to scratch the surface a little bit. We won't probably have time to go a lot of very in depth with it, but trying to understand what OKRs are, trying to understand what are the different components. So what is the difference between an objective, and what is the difference between an objective, a key result, and even an initiative. Then, of course, as we said, similarities and differences between OKRs and more traditional systems, the setting process. And here I will do my best to give you some, again, tips and tricks from practice, rather than just focus on the theory, and the OKRs alignment approaches that can be followed. Now, this being said, I don't want us to lose a lot of time on the introduction. So at least not the introduction of the topic. So rather, let's discuss about the OKRs. Probably some of you heard me discussing earlier with Kamal about the fact that OKRs are not a new topic, because they were invented in the 70s by Andrew Grove while he was president at Intel. So Intel utilized something that was, let's say, the first version of OKRs, very similar to management by objectives, which is, let's say, the father of OKRs. He taught this system to John Doerr. Now, John Doerr in the 90s took this and presented it to Google leadership. So Google, while they were still a very, very small startup, started to implement OKRs. The framework became very, very trendy and a very hot topic in 2013, when Google actually released a video crediting some of their success to the OKRs. So that being said, everyone was curious about what OKRs are and how can they benefit from what OKRs have to provide for companies. Of course, besides this very brief historic moment, after 2014, a lot of things have changed in the way businesses work. We have to remind ourselves about the fact that we work in a much more agile and fast-changing world. Technology is changing every day. Things happen so fast that we need to keep track with those changes, and our businesses are required, or better said, they're forced to be more agile. On the other hand, the profile of workers have changed a lot from the 90s until now. You have millennials, you have Generation Z. They are looking to make an impact. They're looking to be less controlled. So all these together have actually brought OKRs on stage and have made businesses consider OKRs a better way to manage their companies. Now, what are OKRs? As the name says, OKR stands for Objectives and Key Results. This is a dynamic or a more agile goal management framework. It tries to link the vision, so the long term, with the operational reality, which is what we call maybe the short term, or what we have to do. So where we want to be and what we have to do, trying to marry those two together, and translates the strategy into maximum, or let's say between 3 to 5 shorter term objectives, and gives the opportunity for the lower levels of the organization to align to those objectives. So instead of forcing everyone or having a handful of people on top, giving the objectives and the measurements to everyone in the organization, you have more opportunity at lower levels of the organization to set OKRs for yourselves that are meaningful for what the company wants to achieve. So it changes a little bit the perspective and the involvement, virtually making everyone an extremely important actor in setting objectives and setting the way the organization is going to achieve their strategy. On top of that, I get a lot of questions about the differences, let's say, between KPIs and OKRs. Now, KPIs are just a measurement. For instance, the number of pens could be considered a KPI if we add a relevant objective for that. However, an OKR is the actual framework. So it does have shared DNA with the more traditional or other performance management frameworks, but it tries to focus, or let's try to focus more when we talk about the differences on the execution and cadence. So what is the framework all about? Not only what we measure, because it's not going to be that big of a difference on what we measure, but how do we do it? How do we end up with those measurements? What do they signify for us? The whole process actually is the main difference between traditional performance management and the OKRs. In terms of, let's say, pillars, because OKRs in the execution, it has some guidelines without which is not going to be OKRs. And this is what I'm going to, or at least what I want to talk to you about, those main pillars that make OKRs. And the first one, as we mentioned even in the definition, is the agility. The agility in practice is translated through shorter term objectives. Normally, this is 3 months. So we have a 3-month long OKR that, of course, it doesn't mean we cannot take on to the next quarter, but we're trying to focus all our efforts in 1 quarter, trying to see what we can achieve during those 3 months. In practice, I have actually seen companies working with OKRs on a longer time frame. So, for example, 6 months, sometimes even yearly. But when it comes to the way we review the OKRs, I would still say quarterly, we have to stand back and really ask ourselves, is this objective still relevant to me or not? Do I need to change it, or do I still get to continue the work I'm doing? This gives us an opportunity to change as fast as possible, because ultimately, this is what agility means. Being able to change as fast as possible, depending, of course, on the changes from the environment. Besides this, as another OKR pillar, we have the alignment. And here, again, in the definition, I was hinting on that. The fact that we're not talking about cascading. We're not talking about someone from the top giving you the objectives, giving you the measurements, giving you the targets. Top management normally only sets the baseline and the direction, but then everyone in the organization gets to align to those. So even if we're talking about individual level, you get the individuals to write their OKRs. You get the individuals to think, what would be the best objectives for me? What would be the key results that I can achieve and own, rather than have their manager or line manager give them the objectives. So it's more of a bottom-up approach in terms of having everyone involved and giving them the opportunity to write their own objectives, but of course, in alignment to the strategy. Another pillar, the third one, which is, I would say, very uncomfortable for a lot of people, it's the transparency. In terms of transparency, things are very easy. We're talking here about the fact that OKRs should be shared with everyone. My OKRs, for example, because we use OKRs in our organization, my OKRs are shared across the entire organization. Everyone from my CEO to the interns that we have can actually see my OKRs and can see the progress that I'm making. And this is not for the purpose of having everyone feel bad about their achievements or brag with their achievements, but it's for the purpose of collaboration. Let me just give you maybe a quick example. I was working on a product, and just because my colleagues from marketing were able to see what exactly I'm working on, they were able to approach me and say, I want to devise a different marketing plan for this project. Would you be okay for us to work together? So it's not just about having people seeing your OKRs. It's about making sure everyone understands we're one team, and we all have to work together to make sure the objectives are being done. So it's more for triggering collaboration than anything else. But as I said, a lot of people, they're still very much not feeling comfortable with this, because they feel if they don't achieve their objectives, they might be judged by somebody else. But I'm sure in time, this that stops becoming an issue, and the focus gets more on the communication side. In terms of the fourth pillar, we have innovation. Here, what we're actually looking at is the fact that OKRs are trying to take everyone outside of the comfort zone. And they're trying to give everyone the opportunity to bring on new ideas, to think about different and newer solutions. Even if, for example, at the corporate level, we want to achieve a certain number of profits, I still want to give the teams the opportunity to say how they can contribute, and give them the opportunity again to come up with solutions that are outside of the box, to come up with some operational objectives that are going to show their own contribution in a more innovative manner. So instead of just having the same old lofty statements and the same old objectives, we're trying to really look at something that is more tangible, and something that is not just the same approach over and over again. The fifth pillar, it's ambition. Again, the easiest way to describe this would be the fact that we're looking at ambitious objectives and ambitious key results. We're not just aiming for something that is achievable and realistic and easy to achieve. We're not aiming for objectives that are business as usual, but we want to get outside of the realm of what we can do. We want to be ambitious when we set our objectives. We want them to be very, very aspirational. So this is almost the last, but the last pillar is the prioritization. So in practice, if we have only 3 months, we're not going to write OKRs for everything that we're doing, but we're looking at trying to prioritize what is really important and valuable. That being said, let's say the regulation would be to have between 3 to 5 objectives only per 3 months, and then to have 3 to 5 key results per each objective. So we're trying to limit and prioritize only what is important from our job, and not make this a to-do list. Now, I know that I should be getting closer to end this part, but just quickly to go through the differences of what is an objective and what is a key result. It's very easy to think about the objective as what we want to achieve. Where do we want to go? Basically, think about the objective as your destination. Of course, the destination is very different when we have just 3 months to achieve it. So it's probably going to be a shorter term destination, but it has to be something that you can achieve or you want to achieve during those 3 months. The key result is, better said, a feedback mechanism. Is how do we know we're getting there? Do we know, looking at some numbers, we need to make sure that we're achieving that objective. So it should signify if we're successful to achieve the objective or not. And then, although not part of the traditional methodology, a lot of companies are still utilizing initiatives when working with OKRs. So the initiative would answer the question, what will I do to get there? The initiative is the actual project or action that you take in order to achieve your key results or your objectives. So objective, destination, key result, feedback mechanism for achieving that destination. And then we have the initiative, which is if we're achieving it or if we are achieving our objectives or not. In terms of objectives, we were saying earlier that our objectives have to be ambitious. And the reason for using those ambitious objectives comes from Google. And Google was saying that we are setting goals that we know we cannot reach, because stretching to meet them, we can actually go further than we expected. And I'm sure you are familiar with the moonshot idea. This is exactly what the stretched objectives are. We're reaching for the moon, even if we end up with just reaching some stars, we're still further from where we were when we started. Now, one thing about this, which let's say can make things a little bit tricky, is the fact that, of course, if we stretch the objectives and we know they are no longer realistic, we cannot expect 100% achievement. So in this regard, the OKR methodology sees the better or the ideal result somewhere around, let's say, 60 to 70%. 100% is considered that you are, well, either you have an amazing accomplishment and probably you slept at the office, or that you were just sandbagging the results and you were not stretching yourselves as much as you can. 70%, as we said, it's considered to be the ideal achievement. Whereas if we reach something below 70%, it doesn't automatically mean we are not doing our job. It could be that, but I have seen in practice two other possibilities. One, that we set the bar way too high, and even with the best efforts, we couldn't achieve more than that. Or the fact that maybe our OKRs were not our priorities and were focused on something different than the priorities that we had. In terms of OKRs, I've actually prepared an example for you just to see a little bit the differences between the three. And the objective is one of the most common objectives that I had in all our projects starting from 2021, which is becoming an employer of choice. So becoming the best employer. Now, what you see under the objective, these are initiatives. How can I get there? I can be an employer of choice if I have a good company culture. I can be an employer of choice if I have a good benefits package. I can be an employer of choice if I offer the employees development programs. If I am known as transparent and sharing information with everyone. So I can do a lot of projects and initiatives to be an employer of choice. Now, how I'm going to measure that? So which are potential key results? Could be, for example, the employee engagement. And to be a result, I need to have an expected number. So here we have 99% just to be very stretched. Or I want to see if the employees are satisfied with the benefits that they receive. So for example, 95% employee satisfaction with the benefits, or 60% candidates to actually seek out employment for us, just to see, is the word getting out? Do we get a lot of people applying to our jobs? Because that will mean that we are becoming an employer of choice. We can look at the feedback that you receive as well. So the score that we have on Glassdoor or on LinkedIn and so on. But as you can see, results have to be measurable, they have to be tangible, whereas initiatives are what we do, and the objectives are what do we expect to get? Where do we expect to arrive at the end of our journey? It's somehow starting with the end in mind. What do we expect where do we expect to be at the end of those 3 months? I know again that we've only probably scratched the surface with this short discussion, but I would also encourage you to send your questions, and either at the end of each session or at the end of the whole discussion, we're going to take some time for questions. So feel free to write them in the chat or send them to Kamal, and I'm going to do my best to answer them.
Thanks a lot, Alina. So if you have any questions, please, you can write them in the chat space, or you can just raise hand and ask for permission to ask the question. We have a question from Mr. Misfer. Says, so each objective has more than OKRs?
That's right. The rule, I would say, is 3 to 5. 3 to 5 objectives and 3 to 5 key results per each objective. That's the recommendation. So we don't have too little, but we also don't have too many key results and objectives that we lose focus and prioritization.
Another question says, is OKR a replacement of the corporate performance management?
I would say yes. In terms of OKRs is another tool, but we're just kind of covering a few minutes the fact that we can actually also create a hybrid system between balanced scorecard or the performance management you have now and the OKRs. But technically, you can use OKRs for performance management with, again, some complexities. The fact that, for instance, you shouldn't rate the achievement of 100% as perfect achievement or performance. So it has to be designed a bit differently to accustom for the very aspirational objectives.
Thank you. Mr. Mohammed, can
okay. When I raised my hand, I wanted to ask something, and then Miss Alina said something else that even confused me more. So, is the OKR could the OKRs replace the balanced scorecard? If yes, are we going to make it like an OKR trees, like OKR on the level of the corporate, and then you go down to the department, down to the section and individuals, or not? Thank you.
I would answer the first question with yes, and then the second one with yes as well. So you can have OKRs at all the organizational levels. There are companies that are usually the more dynamic ones. So for instance, the IT companies or the companies that are not structured as a department, but they're rather project-based. In their case, the OKRs for the department will actually be project-based OKRs. So the team working on a project will have their own OKRs. If we switch to another project, you're probably going to have different OKRs. But you can have an OKR 3. Of course.
All right, Ms. Khulud, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Kamal. Thank you very much, Alina, for the webinar. I would like to ask something about the OKR. As you mentioned, Alina, previously, that the OKR should be set by the individuals themselves, not by the management. So how this can be replaced or can be presented as the balanced scorecard? As we know that the balanced scorecard should be set by the upper management. I mean, like the team leader or the middle management who can control the team, then they can set the KPIs, etc., etc., etc. But when the end, yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
Please. What I wanted to say is that if it replaces the balanced scorecard, you're replacing it with the methodology of OKRs. So in that case, you have to take the new approach rather than the old approach of balanced scorecard. However, of course, top management is still going to be involved in setting the OKRs at the higher level, and setting the strategy, setting the direction for the whole company. Whereas after that direction is communicated, the lower levels will create their own OKRs. So you still go step by step. It's just that you don't have a chief executive that gives you the objectives for, let's say, procurement or IT or every single function, but the procurement team will be in charge of aligning to the higher level.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now it's clear. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Mr. Ahmed, you have a question?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Alina. Just have a question regarding matching the strategic initiatives with the objectives on the OKRs. Do they match, or how do you match the strategic initiatives from the strategy itself?
It would be ideal to match. However, I know what you're basically asking is the fact that strategic initiatives are usually longer term.
Yes.
Than the OKRs. So what I've seen happening sometimes is taking those strategic initiatives or the strategic objectives, the longer term ones, and creating shorter term OKRs for those. Especially if we're talking here about, for example, governmental entities, because they have a lot of long-term projects, then your short-term OKRs should be reflecting the implementation of those projects. This is only for the strategic initiatives. The initiatives that I was showing you are actually activities or projects that we do to achieve the OKRs. So if we're talking about the ones from the strategy, the OKRs can be subordinate to those.
Great. I'm very interested to know more about the hybrid model between OKRs and the scorecard. Thank you so much.
I will get there in a minute.
Right, Mr. Ahmed, Mr. Amr says regarding the transparency, is it okay to share financial objectives and key results with everyone?
I would say if there are some financial objectives that you can share with everyone, then of course. However, transparency doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to share every single financial result to the whole company. So you're still probably going to have to keep some of those confidential data confidential. But in the OKRs, you should have objectives, for instance, that are related to everyone. When we're talking about revenue, profitability, you still want your entire company or most of the employees to know how you're doing, so they would know if they have to speed up some things, they will have to sell more, they will have to cut down their costs. So how can they actually support you in achieving certain of those objectives? But the confidential data will probably still be there. So your relationship with your banks, your credits, your and so on will still have to be kept from all the employees. I hope this answers the question. And sometimes it's not only about financial information, but if you think about, I don't know, salaries for the employees or certain benefits that only apply to a particular part of your employees, those are not going to be shared, of course, because you still want that to be kept from the majority.
All right, thank you, Alina. So you'll go for the second part now of the webinar?
Yes, of course. So the second part, I guess it's something that most of you were expecting, the OKRs compared to traditional management systems. And we're going to start with comparing the definition. I guess we already defined the OKRs. And we said they are a dynamic framework, and the fact that they are trying to connect the vision and the strategy with all the levels. So making sure everyone understands and knows the most important objectives of the organization. They don't just rely to their tasks or their own KPIs. On the other hand, traditional performance management system is usually a framework that is used to define strategic objectives and KPIs that are normally cascaded down. So you don't get a lot of involvement from everyone. And I guess this was discussed also with Khulud's question. But you always have the manager cascading and writing the objectives and the KPIs for the other teams. As a consequence of this, and you will see a lot of objectives and KPIs in the traditional system, they are looking quite alike from level to level, whereas the OKRs, they are very diverse. They are defined very differently. They are more focused on certain areas, depending what each department actually considers they can do to achieve the strategy. Now, besides this, there are few other main differences. But before we move on, I would also like to give you the definition of balanced scorecard, because balanced scorecard is considered a more traditional tool. It is also a strategic performance management tool, which basically provides us a very structured way of reporting performance. On top of that, the balanced scorecard itself is not used only as one tool, but most of the times it's part of a more complex system of tools. So you have a dashboard that goes with it, you have a strategy map, you have a documentation of every single KPI. So it really is a more complex system, whereas the OKRs, because they're changed more frequently, then they are usually used in a much more simpler version of this system. Now, balanced scorecard, again, as a tool, it's a bit more structured, and it provides more information than OKRs normally do. But I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. And just to provide you with a little bit more differences, as we said, with the OKRs, we're aiming for ambitious objectives, very stretched targets. So we're not looking at just what we can do from the perspective of business as usual. However, in the traditional sense, in the balanced scorecard especially, we normally have realistic objectives, realistic or achievable targets, and 100% achievement is actually encouraged. In the OKRs, we already said the optimal is somewhere between 60 to 70%. In the OKR case, because it's shorter term, we're talking about revision of the data or the progress weekly or bi-weekly. And then in the more traditional one, we are revising the progress either monthly or quarterly. And if we're talking about individual level, it's usually twice a year. So you can see that the cycle is quite different. In terms of the management of OKRs, this is quite a decentralized process. So you will get a lot of people involved. If I am an owner of an OKR, I will update the progress. I will share feedback. I will do the whole process. Whereas in the traditional sense, we have a centralized data submission. We have a centralized team that analyzes information, and things are a bit they're more centralized in terms of the follow-up processes. OKRs, we said they're public. You know that balanced scorecard or the traditional systems, they're usually private. They're not shared with everyone, and are based solely on what you have to do, whereas OKRs are also based on your own aspirations. So trying to get that into the mix. In terms of OKRs, another differentiation is the fact that they shouldn't necessarily be linked with appraisals, and they shouldn't be linked with compensation because of the fact that they are ambitious. And I cannot really judge the ambitious or the achievement of an ambition because they're never the same. When we're talking about realistic targets, of course, if you have to do something and you haven't done it, then in that case, I can link it with the appraisals. But with the OKRs, if we're trying to stretch, if we're trying to make people or make our teams be more, taking more risks, then it's harder to link that with compensation. And this would be, or these are the main differentiations that I've seen. I know, of course, this brings quite a lot of questions, but just remember that KPIs is something that we measure. It's not a framework. So we cannot compare KPIs with OKRs. We can compare KPIs with the key results, the measurement part. And you will probably note that at the level of key results, we can have metrics, because ultimately KPI is something we can measure that is relevant for an area or an objective that we have. So in that case, you will see metrics as key results, because ultimately what we can measure is limited. We cannot reinvent the wheel right there. However, the way we're measuring them and the reason why we're measuring them, again, is different. And the targets we set for those measures are bringing a lot of difference as well. In terms of another similarity, of course, both OKRs and traditional systems, they rely heavily on the strategy as a backbone, if you will, and they also contain objectives. So this is something that probably most performance management systems agree on, is the fact that you need to have an objective in order to select a measurement that is important for you. And in terms of the last part, which someone was already saying that they're interested in, is the integration part. We can virtually have very different ways of integrating. However, the two of them that I'm using, and the ones that I have seen working in practice, are the following two. First of all, having balanced scorecard at the higher levels. So having the realistic targets, having the clear expectations on the high level, on the corporate level, and utilizing OKRs at operational levels to drive the balanced scorecard. In this case, again, we will have a realistic expectation in terms of, let's say, our finances or our revenues. And the OKRs of the departments are going to tell us how they will support the balanced scorecard from the top. The reverse, OKRs on the top and balanced scorecard on the bottom, I don't normally recommend, because if you have ambitious objectives on the top but realistic objectives on the operational level, this will simply create a gap. You will have ambitious objectives on the top that nobody's going to work on because they have their business as usual, and they will focus only on that. So this is one of the reasons why I don't really recommend that, but I do recommend balanced scorecard on the corporate level and OKRs on the operational level. The second one that I've seen being used, although I think it's a bit too complex, so I would only recommend it in maybe smaller companies or companies that have a very, very good performance management history, is to have balanced scorecard at all the levels. So from corporate, departmental, and even employee level, have your balanced scorecard, but a team or individual level, you can add maybe one OKR. So we're not going to have 5 objectives, but maybe only 1 or 2, which will be the aspirational ones. This will tell you what the team or the individual wants to do extra from their job description. Of course, as I said, this brings a lot of questions in terms of basically creates a more complex system than it already is with the balanced scorecard. So you have to ask yourselves how much value it brings. Normally, we're utilizing this where the company is looking to implement balanced scorecard, but you have 2-3 departments which are more dynamic, and they also want OKRs. So just to make them all happy, we have this this approach in the middle. But it doesn't particularly work in large companies that are very complex and implementing it for the whole organization, because it's going to be too much, and it's going to make it very hard for the company to actually manage it. From my side, I think this is what I wanted to share with you now. Again, I know it's quite of a complex discussion, but I'm pretty sure you have some questions in regards to this.
We have a few questions here, Mr. Mohammed. Can you unmute yourself and ask a question? You mentioned the SMART objectives and balanced scorecard. Is that a question?
No. Sorry, it was not a question. It was just a note or a remark. That's it. When Miss Alina was comparing the balanced scorecard or the performance management system to the OKR, she was talking about the realistic of the objective. So I just said it's a SMART objective. So yes, this objective under the balanced scorecard have to be SMART. And as she said, the objective under the OKR will be ambitious and stretched. So it was just a remark, not a question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Ahmed mentioned that then how can HR perform annual appraisals? How can HR perform annual appraisals?
Well, this is probably one of the questions that I always get. What do we do with the appraisals if we have OKRs? So my recommendation, and this is this, do take it with a grain of salt, because normally I answer this question in a context, because it really depends on the organization itself. So what I will probably say is that, of course, you can try to look at the OKRs that are more on the realistic side, because not all the OKRs are going to be ambitious. Probably you're going to have one that is more ambitious than the rest throughout the quarter, but you can't always be very ambitious. So I will look at the ones that are committed or easier to achieve, or the ones that are linked directly with your job description. But of course, for that, you have to make a separation. This OKR is related to my job description, and this one is my ambitious. And I would look at those that are related to the job description, and of course, have the annual appraisal on that. If you have a system that is a hybrid one, then of course, especially with the second bullet point, you have the balanced scorecard, and this is much easier. But other than that, this would be the first thing that comes to mind. But I wouldn't be, again, I would probably look at each company individually and see how they're doing appraisals now, based on what, and see how we can integrate this.
Thanks for the answer. Can you allow me for elaboration?
Of course. I mean, come on.
For the second point, when you mentioned that the balanced scorecard is cascaded to operational level, then would we need to create KPIs along with OKRs to make measurements? That would complicate things, in my opinion.
This is what I was saying, that this is a bit of a more complex situation.
Yeah, I believe going back to your answer where you segregate between committed key results and non-committed key results might be a better, it's also a little bit complicated, but it is better than using KPIs, right?
It's going to be easier for sure, because you only use one framework. You just have to separate between the objectives.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course. Thank you very much for
Thank you.
The questions.
Mr. Osama, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal. Thank you, Elena. OKRs as a topic, does it have to do with the maturity of the organization? Number one. Number two, do we need to perform change management in order to change the mindset of the employees, regardless of their level in the organization, for them to accept the new concepts, new understandings of OKRs versus the traditional performance management systems? Thank you.
So to answer your first question, it's not necessarily about the organization itself, because for instance, Google and a lot of organizations in the IT sector, they started using OKRs when they were just a startup. So it's not about being a very mature organization, but it is let's say it is somehow dependent on the how much of a control your leadership wants to have. Because if you work in an organization where leaders want to have the entire control, then I would say don't work with OKRs, because they are more again towards giving everyone some sort of ownership and accountability. So this is what I think matters more, the culture of the organization rather than how old it is. And to answer your second question, absolutely. Every single change would require change management techniques. Here, because we're trying to change a bit the culture and you're trying to change how things are being done, it's all the more needed to make sure everyone, first of all, understands the need for change, and secondly, understands OKRs before you start implementing it. And when I say everyone, I am referring to top management as well, because I had a lot of cases in which not all the managers were convinced, not all the managers felt that OKRs is the right solution. So they were going back to their teams and saying, I'm not going to care about this, but do it because corporate asks us to do so. And of course, at their level, it was a complete failure because they couldn't care less about that. So you need to make sure everyone is on board, or at least the majority is on board before you start implementing it. I hope I answered it.
Mr. Mohammed, is that you raised hand? Is it? Did we answer the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay. So my question and remark and note is going to be swimming in the same pool of the what everyone have been trying to ask or to understand. In balanced scorecard, I can have the full result on monthly basis for the whole company, for the whole level. Okay. I worked in two companies, both of them are production-based companies, and I was fine with that. Okay. Now I am working in another company, which is logistic services. So everything is quick. There is no time to meetings and stuff. So when you was explaining the OKRs, do you think that the OKR will be more dynamic, and as you said, I will give every manager in his area the freedom to decide his objective, and without the need to the practice of the balance scorecard, where we have to meet every month for several hours and discuss everything. I imagine that in the OKR base, like maybe everyone will have his own separate, maybe half an hour with the top management to review his result, and that's it. He don't have to sit with everyone. And if he want to understand what's going on in the company, as you said, the transparency, he will log in to the platform and see how it's going, and then he will just take care of his own business. So do you think that, yes, for the agile kind of business, it's better to use OKR, or to use, I was thinking not to use the balance scorecard. I wanted to use the normal classic strategic objective trees, and that's it. I will just do a little bit of cascading, a little bit of alignment. But when you said something important, that when you cascade and align, you basically are just copying the objective in a smaller level, but on the OKR, no, I am giving the department manager or the section head the freedom to be ambitious and so on. So I hope that I made my question clear. I don't know if it's clear or not to everyone.
No, it is to a certain extent clear for me what you were asking. However, of course, again, when we're talking about any performance management system, the implementation, you cannot take everything off the shelf and just implement it as is, because it most probably will have to be to a certain extent customized to the organization and the way the organization works. You have some major steps, you have some major expectations, but otherwise you will have to customize and make sure it works for you in your own context. So to be honest with you, when I'm trying to think about your question, I feel that you're probably going into a bit of a more complex type of system. I agree with the fact that OKRs are very dynamic. They need to be changing very fast. And actually there are a lot of opportunities to even change the OKRs throughout the quarter. So if I've set my OKR, but in 2 weeks time something happens, this is no longer relevant, I can go to my manager, or I can go to the top manager if I am the C-level executive, and just say, I need to change this because it's no longer relevant. In terms of the actual way of doing the review, I was mentioning earlier that normally you still have a review meeting or a review checkup at every level, let's say every 2 weeks. But it doesn't have to be the type of meeting that is very formal, the ones we're used to, where you sit in a boring meeting for 1-2 hours and everyone just keeps talking about their part. It can be just you as a manager going to your team, asking them, how are you doing with your OKRs? Do you feel you're doing good? If they say yes, you just go ahead, because as you said, you already have the results in the document, so there's no need for you to check. But if you don't have the discussions, there is a risk that there will be certain bottlenecks that you don't discuss and you don't fix. So the checkup meetings are more for making sure things are progressing as they should. And if there are any issues, you fix them and you find fast solutions, rather than just analyzing the results. Because the numbers you have in front of you, but the numbers without the story, they don't mean much. So you also need the story to go with those, which is, I'm afraid, only through conversation. I do hope I answered your question in as simply as possible.
You did. Thank you very much. You did. Thank you.
My pleasure. And thank you again for all the questions.
I think we have a last part. Alina, you have to go through.
Yes. So the last part, and I think we are exceeding our time right now. So I'm going to try to make it very fast, but it might answer some of the questions that that you previously had in terms of the actual implementation. So the simplest life cycle, so that would be the setting and aligning part. I forgot to mention it. The life cycle, the simple life cycle, is basically at the end of the year or the beginning of the year, or whenever you're starting to implement OKRs, it's better to either create or review your strategy. Make sure it's still relevant. This is the first step, because strategy, again, it's still the backbone. We need to make sure everyone knows our strategy. So besides creation and review, I would say it's very important to communicate it across the entire organization and make sure everyone knows what your vision is, what your mission is, and what are your top objectives. What do you want this company to be in the future? Afterwards, as a second step, you can start setting corporate and then departmental OKRs. A step that I consider to be very, very important for OKRs implementation, the third one, is what I call interdepartmental alignment meeting. This being said, the name doesn't roll off the tongue as much as I would, but the thing is, put everyone that is a manager or an OKR champion in each department together in a room and let them discuss their OKRs. There are going to be a lot of interdependencies across them. There are going to be a lot of challenges in terms of even the OKRs. I have seen these discussions going so well, and I've seen a lot of people challenging the OKRs of another department, giving them tips and tricks. So just keeping the conversation going and making sure every department knows what the other departments are doing and if they have to actually participate or they have to help. It really, really helps to make sure they understand we are one big team working on this strategy. We don't have that silo idea in which I need to achieve my departmental OKRs, so I don't care about the rest of the departments. Only after this step is done, I would go to team or individual. As a bracket, I do not recommend organizations that have just started working with OKRs to go to individual level. I have seen working way better if you keep OKRs at team level and make sure you give your employees a bit of time to just get accustomed to the OKRs. In the traditional performance management, you're only used to being given your objectives. If I'm asking you to create objectives, it's going to be very, very hard, and it will make it much harder on the employees, and then it might increase their resolution not to work with OKRs. So it's better to give them time to adjust. It's better to build that collaboration and only then go to individual level OKRs if you feel the need to do that. Once all the OKRs are in place, then you can start the check-ins weekly or bi-weekly and the end of the quarter review meeting and the next process, setting the next quarter OKRs and so on and so forth. In the beginning, you have to give a bit more time for this whole process to work. It depends on the company and the company size, but in a company that has 70 employees, we have actually managed to implement it in 2 weeks. But again, this not taking into account the change management part, so just the implementation. In the beginning, it's going to take a bit longer. That's why you probably want to start with 6 months longer objectives rather than 3 months, so that they have time to work on the objectives as well. But as time goes and they will get more adjusted, you will see that it's going to take less than a week for the whole process to be implemented from quarter to quarter, because everyone will know what their place and their role is within this whole system. In terms of who does what, I know we had some questions around this, but first of all, you need top management to support this initiative. You need them to be on board. You need them to be game. Otherwise, I have seen a lot of companies which invest a lot of time and resources, but because most of the time top management is not on board, it doesn't stick. So you want them to be on board with creating corporate OKRs, with communicating those OKRs to the lower levels, and getting involved in working with OKRs. Then we have, of course, the teams, the departments, the employees that have to create the lower level OKRs. They have to report on the updates. They have to give feedback from what's happening in the field and how things can be improved. So this is a two-way feedback. Top management, of course, gives you feedback on the achievement, but you also give feedback on how things are going in practice, actually. And department heads, they need to also support their employees and their teams. But remember, the OKR should be created by the whole department together, not just the managers of the department. And as a support team, you have, you name it. I know it has a multitude of names. It can be performance, strategy office, OKRs office, OKR champions. I've heard a lot of names, but this is the department dealing with OKRs. And their role is, of course, to set the guidelines, to help with the implementation, but then to also make sure the OKRs are being used properly. So after the implementation, they have to make sure that review meetings happen, feedback is being given, and the whole culture keeps going. Now, in terms of the some, let's say, common pitfalls, I would say, that happened when setting OKRs, and things to be looking at is first and foremost the subjectivity. Subjectivity in regarding, of course, what is important. Everyone will have a different opinion, and you have to make sure that OKRs are still relevant to the strategy, and you're not creating an anarchy. You're not leaving everyone the flexibility to write whatever objectives they want, but those objectives should be relevant for the strategy. Afterwards, OKRs are still a strategic framework, so you shouldn't be listing unimportant tasks. You shouldn't be listing key results that are not measurable and you just state what you want to do. This is not a wishful thinking. You still need to make sure that key results are key and they look at the end results in a measurable way. Another thing that I've seen in practice is having OKRs that are not understandable by others. Utilizing some phrases that are maybe particular to your department, or writing OKRs in a very fancy way, writing it in big words that have no significance. Just to give you an example, I had a team once trying to write an objective such as impressive velocity. That was their objective. I mean, it has no tangible, basically no tangible meaning. And if you're going to share these OKRs with everyone, you want to make sure your colleagues actually understand what you want to do and understand your OKRs. Another pitfall is to start using OKRs rather than a goal management and something that you purposefully want to do into a system where you just monitor past results. OKRs should be used for objectives that you actively want to achieve, that you're striving to achieve, not just as a monitoring tool. That being said, if you're keeping an OKR for more quarters, you want to maybe stretch it a little bit every quarter, not keep the same measurement and the same result quarter after quarter. For instance, if I were to create pens, I don't want to have the same key result about 10 pens produced per day every quarter, but the next quarter, maybe I'm going to stretch it a bit and say I want to create 12 pens, just to make sure I am seeing some growth. And last but not least, one of the biggest pitfalls is keeping the balance. Keeping this balance between challenging, but not completely unrealistic. And this is why I was saying earlier, you're probably going to have some objectives that are easier to achieve and some that are a bit more ambitious. But if you have all of them ambitious, you're never going to achieve anything. And it's going to demotivate. And I'm off to our last part of the discussion, which is the alignment. Now, alignment normally is this process in which we ensure that all our efforts, all our employees, all our activities are focused in achieving the organizational strategy or achieving the overall objectives. Normally in an organization, the strategy is the higher level. And we want to make sure that everyone is working towards achieving that strategy. In a more practical manner, we have few approaches that will make this happen. The easiest one is when the teams or departments take the same objectives or the same KPIs from the top, but again, they shouldn't be cascaded by someone. This should be decided by the team or the department in question. The second one is when you take the key result from the top, but you transform it to become a key result for your department or for your team. So a key result from the corporate level can become an objective for one department or another, of course, where the case. Another approach is to create lower level OKRs that are not the same, they're not similar, but they support the higher level OKRs. An example here would be if my organization, let's say, wants to again produce pens. This is the easiest example that I have at hand. Then, and I work in HR, I cannot take that objective and say I'm going to produce pens. I'm not going to do that. However, how can I support that? Is by hiring highly skilled professionals that will produce more pens at a higher quality. And last but not least, the last approach, which is not necessarily aligning to the strategy, but is aligning to the function or to the main responsibilities that the department or the lower level has, is creating specific OKRs. So, for example, on top of my head, I'm thinking about a legal department. A legal department is going to have very hard time finding OKRs on the top that they can directly align to. However, they do have a responsibility within the organization. So in that case, maybe they will align more to their function rather than create OKRs aligning to the higher level. And of course, OKRs that come from the ambitious. Remember, we were talking about innovation in the first stage. So those OKRs that are coming from innovation ideas that are higher risks, those can be integrated here as well. But these are the different approaches. In an organization, you will see all of them being used at once. You cannot just pick one and say, I'm going to go with this one, because it really depends on each case. Departments that are core, they might be using more the first two approaches. Departments that are more services or support functions, they might be using the last two more rather than the first two. So it's always case by case. It's never only one approach. In terms of, or maybe just to summarize or give you some tips from my experience, in order to be able to work with OKRs. And again, what we've discussed here is just the surface, but there are a lot of other layers in terms of how to work with OKRs. First and foremost, make sure that the culture is supportive, that you have a flexible culture, that you have a culture in which management is not trying to keep the control on top, because otherwise it's really not going to work. Make sure that your organization is ready. So this goes back to the point where we were talking of making sure you have some cultural change before you start the implementation. And then communication is going to be key. You have to communicate every step of the way. You have to communicate the strategy. You have to communicate the objectives from the top. You have to make sure everyone understands what we want to do and why we want to do it. You need to motivate the employees, get their buy-in to actually stretch. Because otherwise, if they don't understand your motives, they will not stretch. Then establish the process. Make sure the process is clear for everyone. Make sure they know what is expected from them, when is expected, and make sure the feedback happens. Those discussions actually happen. If they don't, then your OKRs are just going to be like any other single management framework that is being used as just another review, just looking at numbers without a lot of tangibility for everyone. So I feel that this regular feedback, those check-in meetings really help a lot the company in not only keeping OKRs active, but making sure problems are being solved on time and they're not dragged on by the end of the quarter. As I said, renounce the control-oriented mindset and try to give everyone just a little bit more flexibility, give them a bit more ownership. And OKRs, I think it's a system that ultimately wants to make sure every single person in the organization has a feeling of the fact that they're contributing. They're not just doing their tasks like a robot, but they are contributing to something bigger than them. And this is why you need to give up a bit of the control to achieve that. And last but not least, make sure you have a proper implementation, but proper implementation for your own environment. So follow the rules that make sense to you and try to customize as much as possible so it works in your case. I do hope that these helped, but I'm going to hand it over to Kamal again for questions from your side.
Thank you, Alina, very much. Thank you for your this very beneficial and informative webinar. If there's any question, please you can unmute yourself or raise hand and ask. We exceeded our time. Sorry about that, but I think it was very interesting. I would like to mention that we are organizing the Certified OKR Professional during 12th to 16th June next month. That's an online training course, and if you'd like to join, of course you are welcome. We'll send you the registration link. I already sent that. I can send it again, or you can scan. Anyway, I have your email, so I can send it to you This is another copy of it. And regarding the recording, we're going to send you the link for the recording of the webinar as well to all the registrants and the attendees. So if you have any questions, we can take 1 or 2 maximum before we conclude the webinar.
But I'm sure if there are no, I'm sorry to just jump in. If there are no questions, I'm sure you can send, and if you remember something tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, you can send everything to Kamal, and he and I will be in contact, of course.
Right. So thank you very much. Thank you for your attendance. On behalf of Agents Consulting and myself, I thank you. I thank Alina for her time and her effort in presenting this beautiful presentation. Thank you all, and we hope that we will see you next month in the training course, hopefully, and Alina will be also training that course. So
looking forward to that.
We are looking forward all to see you again, and have a great night, have a good day, and have a good night. Thank you, Alina. Thank you.
Thank you very much to everyone, and thank you again to Kamal and his team for inviting me and for facilitating this this meeting. And I do apologize for taking more of your time.
Most welcome. Thank you, Alina. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. Have a great evening ahead.
You too, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alina. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
يوسف شكرا لك. في أمان الله.
Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you, Saleh.